Zilva stood on the edge of the human base, staring at the bustling activity around them. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the concrete. The Earth was an unpredictable place, unlike any of the planets Zilva had visited. The Diplomat had been to many worlds, negotiating peace and understanding, but nothing had prepared them for what lay ahead. Today, Zilva was on Earth, sent by their species to engage in diplomatic talks with humanity. It was a mission to build a bridge between two worlds, but it felt more like walking into the unknown. The first thing that struck Zilva was the noise. On other worlds, peace and quiet were the norm. The air was filled with the hum of technology, the calmness of well-planned cities. But on Earth, there was no calm. People shouted, machines roared, and there was a constant energy in the air. Humans were different. They were loud, chaotic, and yet, there was something alive about them. Something raw. Zilva had heard stories about humans, how they were a species driven by emotion, their impulses leading them to great achievements and devastating failures. They were violent, unpredictable, and yet somehow they had survived. They had thrived. And now Zilva was here to see for themselves if it was true. Alex, the human assigned to escort Zilva, stood nearby, observing them closely. The human's eyes were sharp, their posture confident and unwavering. Alex was the kind of person who radiated strength, a natural leader. Zilva had read about Alex's history, a decorated soldier who had led many successful missions. But that didn't make Zilva feel any less uneasy. Alex had already given a brief introduction to the human world and their customs. They spoke about the dangers of Earth, about how humans had learned to survive in one of the harshest environments in the galaxy. The idea of survival was something that Zilva struggled to understand. Their species had no need to fight for their existence. But humans were different. They had to fight for everything. Are you ready? Alex asked, their voice smooth but commanding. Zilva nodded slowly, trying to control their nerves. They had seen many warriors before, but there was something about Alex that unsettled them. Perhaps it was the way Alex moved, like they were always prepared for something. Like there was a storm inside them, a raw energy waiting to be unleashed. As they walked together toward the meeting hall, Zilva couldn't help but notice how Alex's eyes kept scanning the surroundings. They were alert, always watching. Zilva tried to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled in their chest. There was no room for fear in diplomacy. They had a job to do, and they would do it. But even as Zilva tried to focus on the task at hand, they couldn't stop thinking about the stories they had heard about humans. How they could be ruthless in battle, how their strength was unmatched. And then there were the rumors about their emotional capacity. How they could feel joy, sorrow, anger, love, and hatred all at once, and yet still find a way to move forward. Zilva had seen many species, but none quite like humans. They were unpredictable, like fire. Beautiful and dangerous, Zilva. Alex's voice snapped them out of their thoughts. You're thinking too much. Just stay close. Everything will be fine. Zilva felt a wave of irritation wash over them, mixed with something else they couldn't quite place. It was as if Alex had seen through them, had understood their discomfort. That should not have been possible. Diplomats were trained to hide their emotions, to remain composed no matter what. But Alex had a way of making them feel exposed, like they were a simple creature, just as wild and untamed as the humans they had been sent to observe. The doors to the meeting hall opened, and the sound of voices grew louder. Zilva could sense the tension in the air, the anticipation. The humans, with their raw energy, seemed ready for anything. But Zilva's heart was pounding in their chest. They had never been so unsure of themselves. They walked inside, and the first thing Zilva noticed was the table at the center of the room, surrounded by humans. They were all dressed in military uniforms, their expressions focused, their eyes sharp. Zilva felt a chill run down their spine. The room smelled of metal and sweat, a stark contrast to the sterile environments they were used to. The humans were real. They weren't like the peaceful diplomats Zilva was accustomed to. They were warriors ready for a fight at any moment. Alex took a seat at the head of the table, and Zilva was guided to the chair beside them. As Zilva sat down, they felt a strange weight on their shoulders. It wasn't the responsibility of their mission, nor the fear of the unknown. It was something else, something intangible. Zilva couldn't shake the feeling that they were in. The presence of something more powerful than they could comprehend. The human general, a tall woman named Mia, stood up and spoke. "Welcome, Zilva. We've been waiting for you." Zilva nodded politely, their eyes briefly flickering to Alex. There was something about the human that made them uneasy, but also drawn to them. They were so human, so full of life, so full of energy. It was both terrifying and mesmerizing at the same time. Zilva couldn't explain it. But they knew one thing for sure. This wasn't going to be an easy mission. As the meeting began, Zilva tried to focus on the task at hand. They had to negotiate, to form a connection between their species and humanity. But every time Alex spoke, Zilva felt their heart race. It wasn't just Alex's words, but the way they spoke. With passion, with fire. Zilva had never seen anyone so alive, so human. And it both terrified and intrigued them. "Let me know what you think, and if you'd like to move forward with the next part." You said, Part 2 1,000 words Kaleko or interesting unit Shea or third-person style. Malakani ha or simple basic English ka use karna high without dot or underline ChatGPT said. Here's part 2 of the story. Written in simple, basic English and in third-person style. The meeting room buzzed with tension as Zilva sat beside Alex, listening to the human general, Mia, speak. The words seemed to float by, distant and unclear. Zilva's thoughts kept drifting back to Alex. How could one human exude such strength and control? How could someone so raw, so untamed, have the ability to command a room with nothing but their presence? Zilva's mind raced. The humans seemed unfazed by the alien visitors, as if they were used to things like this. Earth was a dangerous place. And yet, the humans stood strong against whatever the universe threw at them. They had survived on a planet full of deadly creatures, harsh environments, and constant conflict. Zilva had never encountered anything like it before. It was both frightening and impressive. Alex's gaze never wavered as they listened to Mia speak, their sharp eyes scanning the room like they were watching for any potential threat. Every muscle in their body was tense, ready to react at a moment. Notice, Zilva could feel the raw energy emanating from them, an energy they had never encountered in any other species. The diplomat tried to focus on the conversation, but their thoughts kept drifting to the human beside them. Zilva had been to countless worlds, seen countless species, and yet nothing had prepared them for the overwhelming presence of Alex. It wasn't just their physical power, but something deeper. A strength in their soul. A force that Zilva could not fully comprehend. It made Zilva uneasy. As the conversation shifted to the terms of the peace talks, Zilva glanced over at Alex again. They weren't looking at Zilva, but Zilva could feel the intensity of their gaze, as if they were reading Zilva's every thought. The diplomat tried to maintain their composure, but something inside them began to stir. There was a magnetic pull toward Alex, something Zilva couldn't explain. They had heard that humans were unpredictable, but this was something more. Continued discussing the details of the treaty, but Zilva's attention was elsewhere. The sounds of the humans around them faded into the background. All Zilva could hear was the steady, rhythmic pulse of their own heart, echoing in their chest. And then, without warning, Alex spoke. Their voice cut through the air, firm and commanding. "We don't negotiate with fear. We negotiate with strength." Zilva's heart skipped a beat. The words were simple, but they hit with the force of a storm. There was no fear in Alex's voice, no hesitation. Just confidence, It was the kind of strength Zilva had read about in human history, but seeing it firsthand was something else. Entirely. Zilva could feel their pulse quicken as they looked at Alex. They had never met anyone like this before. Alex leaned forward slightly, their eyes meeting Zilva's for the first time in the meeting. For a brief moment, Zilva felt exposed, as if Alex could see right through them, as if Alex could see all the doubts and insecurities Zilva had hidden for so long. It was uncomfortable, yet strangely thrilling. The room went quiet as Alex continued. If we want peace, we fight for it. If we want respect, we earn it. And if we want to survive, we never back down, ever. Zilva felt the weight of the words pressing down on them. It wasn't just a speech, it was a declaration. Alex wasn't just speaking to the room. They were speaking to Zilva. They were challenging Zilva's entire perception of humanity. Zilva shifted uncomfortably in their seat. The humans' words had sparked something deep within them. This wasn't what they had expected. The humans weren't weak. They weren't helpless. They weren't savage. No, they were powerful, and their strength came from something primal, something Zilva couldn't quite grasp. But Zilva couldn't deny the attraction they felt both to the words and to the person who spoke them. The human General Mia nodded in agreement, her voice calm but filled with authority. Alex speaks the truth. We fought wars, survived countless threats, and we're still here. We're not afraid to stand up to anyone, even the most powerful species in the galaxy. Zilva's mind raced as they processed the words. Humans were resilient. Humans fought for survival, not just because they had to, but because they believed in it. There was something deeply admirable about that. Something that stirred a feeling inside Zilva, something they had never felt before. Alex turned to Zilva. Again, their expression unreadable. For a moment, there was no hostility, no fear, just understanding. Zilva wasn't sure what they saw in Alex's eyes, but it made their heart race even faster. It was as if Alex knew exactly what Zilva was thinking, as if they had already seen through the Diplomat's carefully constructed exterior. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Zilva felt a sense of unease. Not because they feared humans, but because they feared the pull they felt toward Alex. They couldn't explain it, and they didn't want to. But it was there, an undeniable attraction to someone who, just hours ago, had seemed like the epitome of everything Zilva feared. Zilva, Alex said, their voice softer now but still filled with that strange intensity. You don't need to be afraid. We're not your enemies. Zilva felt their breath catch in their throat. They wanted to respond, to say something that made sense, but the words failed them. All they could do was nod, their minds still spinning. There was something about Alex, something magnetic, something that made Zilva feel like they were standing at the edge of something new. Something terrifying, yet exhilarating. The meeting continued, but Zilva couldn't focus. Every time Alex spoke, their words felt like a challenge to everything Zilva had believed. And yet, Zilva was drawn to it, drawn to them. The Diplomat couldn't explain why, but they knew one thing for sure. Earth and humanity were nothing like they had imagined, and Alex ... Alex was far more than just a human . The tension in the room was thick, almost suffocating. Zilva sat in their chair, feeling the weight of every moment, every glance exchanged between the humans. It was as if they were caught in a storm, surrounded by the raw, untamed power of humanity. Alex's words still echoed in their mind. We negotiate with strength. Zilva couldn't shake the feeling that those words weren't just about diplomacy. They were a challenge, a reminder that humans didn't fear anything. Zilva's gaze flickered toward Alex again. The human's eyes were focused on the general, but Zilva could see the fire in them. The energy, the strength. It was like a flame that refused to be extinguished. And Zilva could feel themselves drawn to it, like moth to flame. Alex's presence was magnetic, their every movement filled with purpose. Zilva had seen leaders before, but never like this. Alex wasn't just commanding the room. They were commanding respect, not through force, but through something deeper. A strength that wasn't easily defined. Mia, the human general, continued to discuss the terms of the peace talks. Zilva tried to listen, to focus on the negotiation at hand, but it was impossible. The thoughts of Alex kept intruding. What was it about this human that made Zilva feel so unsettled? The power, the raw energy, but it was more than that. It was the unspoken connection, the pull that Zilva couldn't understand. Zilva? Mia's voice broke through the fog in Zilva's mind. Are you listening? Zilva blinked, forcing themselves to focus. Yes, of course, they replied, trying to mask the unease in their voice. Mia raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. We're not here to waste time. We need to come to an agreement, and quickly. The situation is urgent. Zilva nodded, feeling the pressure mounting. The peace talks weren't just about diplomacy. They were about survival. But the more Zilva sat here, the more they felt like they were losing control. The humans weren't like the other species they had dealt with. They weren't easily intimidated, easily controlled. They were raw, untamed, and unpredictable. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. Zilva jumped in surprise, their heart racing. Alex, without missing a beat, stood up, their eyes flashing with readiness. They were on alert in an instant, their body tense, every muscle prepared for action. Zilva watched in awe as Alex moved. Toward the door, their movements fluid and fast, like a predator stalking its prey. Stay here, Alex ordered, their voice low and commanding. Zilva didn't argue. They couldn't even if they wanted to. They watched as Alex disappeared into the hallway, the door slamming shut behind them. The room was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Zilva's heart was pounding in their chest. They didn't know what was happening, but they knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was, Alex was ready for it. The minutes stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity. Zilva couldn't sit still. They stood up, pacing nervously. The peace talk seemed far away now, insignificant in the face of whatever danger had just entered the building. Zilva tried to maintain their composure, but their thoughts kept returning to Alex, the way Alex had moved, the way they carried themselves. It wasn't just confidence, it was something else. Something primal. Suddenly the door flew open, and Alex strode back into the room, their face flushed with adrenaline. It's nothing, they said, their voice calm, but Zilva could hear the tension underneath. Just a minor issue. Zilva didn't believe them for a second. They could see the way Alex's muscles were still tense, the way their hands were slightly shaking. Something had happened out there, and Alex wasn't telling them everything. But Zilva wasn't sure if they should press for answers. The human strength, their power, was something Zilva didn't fully understand. Mia stood up, clearly relieved. That's good to hear. Now back to the negotiations. Zilva sat back down, trying to focus again, but the words felt distant. Mia and Alex continued to talk, their voices blending into the background. Zilva's mind was elsewhere, caught in the storm of emotions they couldn't escape. They were caught between duty and something far stronger, something that pulled them toward Alex. Zilva had always prided themselves on being in control of their emotions, on being composed in the face of danger. But here, with the humans, it felt different. It felt like they were losing themselves, like the very essence of who they were was slipping away. Alex had returned to their seat, but Zilva couldn't stop glancing at them. It wasn't just the physical power they felt. It was the energy, the presence that radiated from Alex. Zilva had seen many species before, many different cultures, but no one had ever made them feel this way. A strange thought crossed Zilva's mind. Maybe the humans weren't savage. Maybe they were something else entirely. Maybe their strength wasn't just physical. Maybe it was something deeper, something that came from their very soul. Zilva shook their head, trying to rid themselves of the thoughts. This wasn't the time for distractions. They had a job to do. The peace talks had to succeed. But every time Alex spoke, every time they moved, Zilva couldn't help but be drawn in. The raw power, the determination, the strength, everything about Alex made Zilva feel something they hadn't felt in a long time. Fear. Fear. And attraction. It was a feeling Zilva wasn't used to. They had always been in control, always confident in their abilities to negotiate and manipulate. But with Alex, it was different. Zilva was just one small part of a larger galaxy. Alex, on the other hand, was everything. They were alive, they were power, they were humanity at its core. And for the first time, Zilva wasn't sure if they were strong enough to face it. Zilva stood at the window, watching the humans move outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and orange, but Zilva couldn't enjoy the view. Their mind was a storm, swirling with thoughts they couldn't control. Every time they closed their eyes, they saw Alex. Every time they tried to focus, Alex's words echoed in their ears. "We negotiate with strength." Zilva knew they had to focus on the peace talks, but it felt impossible. Their thoughts kept drifting. Back to the human beside them. Alex. Zilva couldn't stop thinking about the strength they'd seen in Alex. The way they moved. The way they commanded respect without ever raising their voice. There was something about Alex that was unlike anything Zilva had ever encountered. And it scared them. Alex wasn't just a soldier or a diplomat. They were something more, something raw and untamed. A force of nature. And Zilva couldn't help but be drawn to them. The diplomat had always prided themselves on their ability to remain neutral, to keep their emotions in check. But here, with Alex, everything was different. Every time Alex spoke, every time their eyes met, Zilva felt a tug in their chest, a pull they couldn't ignore. Zilva turned away from the window, their heart racing. They had to get a grip. They couldn't afford to let their feelings get in. The way of the mission, the peace talks were too important. If they failed, it could mean the destruction of everything they had worked for. Zilva knew that better than anyone. They had seen what happened when peace failed. They had seen entire civilizations crumble, entire species wiped out. But somehow, the urgency of the mission didn't seem as important as the way Alex made them feel. Zilva closed their eyes, trying to push the thoughts away, but it was no use. The more they tried to ignore it, the stronger the pull became. They were captivated by Alex, by their strength, their raw energy. It was unlike anything Zilva had ever known. The door to the room opened, and Alex walked in, their footsteps steady and confident. Zilva's heart skipped a beat. Alex was everything Zilva wasn't. Where Zilva was composed and controlled, Alex was wild and untamed. Where Zilva had learned to suppress their emotions, Alex wore theirs on their sleeve, letting their passion drive everything. They did. "You're not focused," Alex said, their voice calm but filled with an edge of something else. "We need to finish this, Zilva. If we don't, everything will fall apart." Zilva opened their eyes and turned toward Alex. They could see the fire in Alex's gaze, the intensity that burned behind every word. It made Zilva's heart race. And for a moment, they wondered if Alex knew what was going on inside them. Could Alex sense the way their heart thudded whenever they were close? Could Alex feel the way Zilva's body responded to their presence? "I'm focused," Zilva replied, their voice sounding less confident than they had intended. I need a moment." Alex didn't speak for a long time, just stood there, watching them. Zilva could feel their eyes on them, and it made their skin prickle. There was something about Alex that made Zilva feel vulnerable, exposed. They weren't used to that feeling. They had always been in control, always able to hide their true emotions behind a mask of professionalism. But with Alex, that mask was slipping, and Zilva wasn't sure they wanted to stop it. "I don't think you're just scared of peace talks," Alex said finally, their voice soft but cutting through the tension. "I think you're scared of something else." Zilva swallowed hard. They knew what Alex meant, but they didn't want to admit it. They didn't want to admit that what scared them wasn't the mission itself, but the way Alex made them feel. The way Alex made them feel. Alive in a way they had never experienced before. The way Alex made them feel like they were standing on the edge of something big, something dangerous, something impossible to control. Zilva took a step back, shaking their head. "I'm not scared," they said, their voice quieter now. "I just don't understand you." Alex's eyes softened, the intensity in them fading just slightly. "You don't have to understand me, Zilva. You just have to trust me." Zilva's chest tightened at the words. Trust. That was something they had never been able to give easily. Trust was dangerous, especially in their line of work. Trust could lead to betrayal. It could lead to destruction. But as Zilva stood there, looking at Alex, something deep inside them knew that they wanted to trust. They wanted to believe in Alex, in humanity, in the raw power that radiated from them. "Why?" Zilva whispered, their voice barely audible. "Why do you make me feel like this?" Alex took a step closer, their presence overwhelming. "Because that's what humans do, Zilva. We make others feel. We don't hide. We don't suppress. We live with everything we have, and sometimes ... scares people." Zilva felt their breath catch in their throat. The words were like a punch to the gut. They had never understood humans before. Never. Understood the fire that burned within them. But now, as Alex stood before them, Zilva realized that maybe they didn't need to understand. Maybe they just needed to feel. "I'm not like you," Zilva said, their voice shaky. "I don't know how to handle this." Alex's gaze softened, and they reached out, placing a hand on Zilva's shoulder. "That's okay. You don't have to handle it alone." Zilva looked up into Alex's eyes, and for the first time they saw something different. It wasn't just strength. It wasn't just power. It was vulnerability. It was a raw, unfiltered connection, and it terrified Zilva. But it also pulled them in a way they couldn't explain. "I don't know if I can do this," Zilva admitted, their voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to do anything," Alex replied gently. "Just be yourself." Zilva closed their eyes, the storm inside them still raging. But for the first time, they felt a little calmer. Maybe Alex was right. Maybe they didn't have to have all the answers. Maybe they just had to trust. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The days following the conversation with Alex were a blur for Zilva. The peace talks were still ongoing, but everything felt different now. The tension in the air had shifted, and Zilva couldn't tell if it was from the talks themselves or from something deeper. Something inside them had changed, and they weren't sure how to handle it. The attraction, the fear, the trust, they were all tangled together in a way Zilva had never experienced before. Every time they saw Alex, their heart raced. The raw power that Alex exuded was still as overwhelming as ever, but now there was something else, something that made Zilva feel both vulnerable and alive. The bond they had formed was undeniable. But as the days went on, Zilva began to wonder if it was enough. Could they truly move forward with the peace talks while carrying these feelings for Alex? Was it even possible to separate the emotions from the mission? Zilva found themselves standing at the same window again, staring out at the human base. The sounds of the Earth's constant movement filled the air, but Zilva was lost in thought. The stars above reminded them of how small they were in the grand scheme of the galaxy. How small they had always been. And yet, here on Earth, something had awakened inside them, something big, something powerful, something they couldn't ignore. The door to the room opened behind them, and Zilva knew who it was without having to look. The presence, the energy, Alex. They always seemed to know when Zilva was deep in thought, as if they could sense the conflict inside them. Zilva. Alex's voice was soft but firm, pulling Zilva from their thoughts. It's time. We can't wait any longer. Zilva turned to face Alex, their heart pounding in their chest. The words were simple, but there was a weight behind them. The peace talks had reached a critical point. Either they would find a way to work together, or everything would fall apart. Are you ready? Alex asked, their eyes searching Zilva's face. Zilva hesitated. They weren't sure what ready meant anymore. The diplomat had spent their entire life preparing for moments like this. Moments of intense negotiation. Moments where the fate of entire species rested in their hands. But this was different. This wasn't just about peace. This wasn't just about survival. This was about something much more complicated. I don't know, Zilva said, their voice quieter than they had intended. I don't know if I can do this. Alex took a step closer, their gaze unwavering. You don't have to do it alone. We're in this together. Zilva swallowed hard. The simplicity of the words, the confidence in Alex's voice, it was like a lifeline thrown into the storm inside them. Alex wasn't just offering partnership. They were offering trust. I'm not like you, Zilva said, their voice shaky. I don't know how to ... double quotes. Alex raised a hand to stop them. You don't need to be like me. You just need to be yourself. That's all. Zilva closed their eyes, taking a deep breath. Alex's words washed over them, soothing the storm. In their mind, they didn't need to have all the answers. They didn't need to be perfect. They just needed to trust. Trust in the peace talks. Trust in humanity. Trust in Alex. I can't promise that I won't be afraid, Zilva said, their voice barely a whisper. But I can promise that I'll try. Alex smiled, a small knowing smile that made Zilva's heart skip a beat. That's all anyone can ask for. Zilva looked at Alex for a long moment, searching their face for any hint of doubt. But all they saw was certainty. There was no fear in Alex's eyes. There was no hesitation. Just raw, unyielding confidence. It was the kind of confidence Zilva had always admired, the kind that made humans seem both terrifying and fascinating. Let's do this, Zilva sighed, taking a deep breath and standing a little straighter. Alex nodded, their expression softening just a little. Together, the two of them walked side by side to the meeting hall. The air outside was cold, but Zilva barely noticed. The weight of the mission was heavy on their shoulders, but with Alex beside them, they felt a sense of strength they hadn't felt before. For the first time, Zilva wasn't afraid. They weren't sure what the future held, but they knew they couldn't face it alone. Not anymore. The door to the meeting hall opened, and Zilva stepped inside, feeling the eyes of the humans and aliens. On them, the peace talks were about to begin, and Zilva was ready. They were no longer the calm, composed diplomat they had been when they first arrived on Earth. They were something new, something different. They were someone who was willing to trust, to take a chance on something bigger than themselves. Mia, the human general, stood at the head of the table, waiting for them. Zilva, Alex, she said, her voice firm but welcoming. It's time. Zilva nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle over them. This was it. This was the moment that would determine the fate of both their species. And yet, despite the pressure, despite the uncertainty, Zilva felt a sense of peace. It was the same peace they had felt when Alex had spoken those simple words to them. We're in this together. The meeting began, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, Zilva felt truly present. The words came easier now. The negotiations felt more natural. There was no fear, no hesitation. Just trust. Trust in Alex. Trust in humanity. Trust in the strength that came from raw emotion, from being alive, from being human. As the talks progressed, Zilva found themselves becoming more and more convinced that humanity's strength was not just in their technology or their power. It was in their hearts, in their ability to feel, to fight for what they believed in, to stand up against the odds and keep going. By the end of the meeting, an agreement had been reached. A peace treaty that would unite their two species and open a new chapter in the galaxy. Zilva couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Not just for the success of the talks, but for the humans they had come to respect and for the connection they had formed with Alex. As they left the room together, Alex turned to Zilva, a small smile tugging at the corner of their lips. "You did it," Alex said quietly. Zilva looked at Alex, feeling something stir inside them, something they couldn't quite put into words. "We did it," they said softly, their heart full. And for the first time, Zilva truly believed it. They had done it. Together.